Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this important discussion that we're going to have for the next hour or so with one of the absolute leaders in business today. My name is BJ Schaknowski. I'm the CEO of symplr. We are a healthcare operations software company based out of technically Houston, Texas, but actually we have no offices, so I'm sure that's something we may talk about today.
Let's do it.
And I am here with Alan Murray, the CEO of Fortune Media. Alan is renowned for working with CEOs across all industries, really on a variety of topics. We'll talk about some of those today. But he's also known for producing what is, to me, I consider it a crutch. Many others consider it a tool. But that's his CEO Daily newsletter, which is incredibly insightful and is the author of many books, including Tomorrow's Capitalist, My Search for the Soul of Business. I actually read this on a plane on the way to London a year ago, and it has been, as a first-time CEO, incredibly helpful for me in so many ways. I think it's really, really relevant for the time and really, really important. So hopefully we can touch on some of those topics as well.
Happy to. Yeah, thank you for having me, BJ.
Awesome.
Great to be here.
Well, listen, our goal today, we're going to pick Alan's brain. We'll share some thoughts from a healthcare lens, and specifically healthcare technology lens, on some of these broader topics. But I'm going to start with the biggest softballs of all softballs. Alan, you talk to CEOs every day, right? Big companies, small companies, cross industry. In December of 2023, what are the top 3 topics on the minds of CEOs that you're hearing about?
Yeah, we also poll, so I have a pretty good sense of that. I'm tempted to say the top 3 topics are AI, and AI,
Sure.
But I'll leave that to number 1. Look, it's only been a year since ChatGPT was released.
Yeah.
And you think of, there's never been a technology that was adopted as fast as ChatGPT was, and there's certainly never been a technology that invaded the enterprise as quickly as a generative AI.
Certainly.
So every conversation I've had with business leaders has revolved around this technology, both the upsides, the incredible productivity gains that they're seeing in some demonstration projects, but also concerns about the downsides. Is it protecting IP? Is it protecting our data? What is this crazy hallucination thing? Why does it make stuff up?
Yeah.
So I think that's number 1. Number 2, interestingly, and this hasn't been true for decades, is geopolitics. I mean, the combination of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and then a year later, the war between Israel and Hamas has thrown a lot of businesses into uncertainty. It's not that those 2 events have huge economic consequences. I think the biggest effect is that they've gotten people to think about, well, what if something happened in China?
Yep.
What if this was Taiwan, not Ukraine, and we have a big business there? What would we do? So geopolitics has rocketed very high in the set of concerns. And then the other big one is the continued focus on the energy transition. You mentioned stakeholder capitalism.
Yep.
Companies trying to figure out how they should play if we really are phasing out fossil fuels, as was agreed in Dubai recently. What does that mean for me and my company? I think those are the 3 that we hear most regularly.
So lots to unpack there, right?
Yep.
I can tell you that the lens of healthcare, or at least our research and my interactions with healthcare system CEOs, AI is certainly amongst the top 3, both clinical and non-clinical.
Yeah.
What are the implications of the acceleration for the patient, for the healthcare worker? What are the risks relative to the data, right? And certainly in healthcare, when you say risk, that usually means patient safety. And so very real implications there.
Yeah, we had an event in California recently and heard so many interesting examples. First, on the positive side, drug development. There was a woman who oversees AI at Pfizer, so they really think that AI can help them get huge productivity gains, 50, 60, 70% productivity gains in developing new drugs, which ultimately improves health. There was a lot of talk about this idea of co-pilots. You could have a health co-pilot that you don't have to make a doctor's appointment. You can talk to your health co-pilot and get advice you need on immediate issues. So I think that That's a big one. And then there was talk about the doctor's co-pilot. Like
Yeah.
if you're a cancer doctor and there are 10 new research papers coming out every month that you don't have time to read, you
Right.
have a practice, you're dealing with patients. Can ChatGPT ingest all of those new research papers and give you a quick summary so it can affect your practice? So it's really, because it's such a general purpose technology,
Yeah.
it's really kind of mind-boggling all the ways it could affect healthcare.
The third piece of that, it's super timely. I was at a Susan G. Komen board meeting dinner Monday night in San Francisco, and the head of oncology for UCSF is actually one of the folks driving a lot of the research for Komen. A lot of people know Komen as the pink walks and taking care of patients. We're actually investing materially in eradicating and finding cures for breast cancer itself. But he actually spoke at the dinner, and he referred to AI as nothing less than the potential democratization of healthcare. If you think about the specialized physicians and surgeons that you could have in San Francisco, New York, Dallas, et cetera, high income areas, take all the information they have that a general oncologist in the middle of Kansas may never have access to, consume that via ChatGPT or another large language model in AI, and now make it available to those physicians. You all of a sudden are now increasing the level of healthcare that anyone can get in the country at any time.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, BJ. I mean, it's early days, right?
Yeah.
This has only been around for a year, but there's been some research that shows it is a democratizing technology in general.
Yep.
Most of the technology gains of the last 30 years are thought to have increased inequality and favored skilled workers. We were all told you got to go back to school and learn to code or be a data scientist. This is the first one where the biggest boosts in productivity are being seen with fairly low-skilled workers. And so there is the possibility that this one will have much more of a democratizing effect in general.
Well, certainly when it comes to healthcare, let's hope so.
Yeah.
Because I think health equity is something that all countries, and this country is not immune to this either, has suffered with. And I think there are a lot of steps that are going to have to happen to create health equity. This could be one of them. And technology could be that accelerant.
One of the things I'd love to hear you talk about, though, given all the health systems that symplr oversees, there was some concern in the early days of ChatGPT about data protection.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that we protect sensitive data from being consumed by these large language models? Have we solved that problem? Is that still an issue?
No more or less than any other industry, I would say, but I think the stakes are a little bit higher because of the information they have.
Yeah.
Right. The last thing I want, right, as someone who unfortunately sees his orthopedic surgeon more than I'd like to admit, is that data making its way on the internet, and certainly much more sensitive information than that.
Yep.
And so what I would tell you is, like many other industries, and healthcare certainly technologically has been lagging. I think it is now realized, and COVID was really an eye-opener for it, that it needs to catch up from a technology standpoint. And so you're seeing massive investments. You're seeing the role of the chief information officer become much more prominent in healthcare systems now. But data security and privacy, and then data rights, data governance, how to think about AI and any other, frankly, data standards that they need to maintain are now coming to the forefront in these systems. What I will tell you, though, is if you back up even a little bit and not think about the AI considerations, basic data security and privacy, right? CIOs inside of large healthcare systems, they're more worried about ransomware attacks, cyber breaches, right? The threats that employees actually create to their own cyber threat posture. And so I will tell you that each and every one of them are trying to figure out how to even protect the data they have. And then once they get basic levels of protection established, how to then turn that data into an asset, right? To provide better care, to provide cross-facility pollination.
That's obviously one of the problems with the technology like this is it empowers people. It also empowers the bad guys. Yeah. I mean, I heard last week 2 different stories of voice clones. Someone has used AI to create, like, we'll recreate BJ's voice and then call BJ's CFO and say, hey, would you move a bunch of money to this bank account?
He would say no if I was on the video.
If it was you.
He would. Unfortunately, he won't fall for that one, but others might, which I think is the point of that conversation. No, I think it's terrifying, but I think, interestingly, and I'm going to take the AI example, though, I do think this idea of productivity, right? And a real productivity accelerant for all roles. I know a lot of people are worried about staff replacement. We honestly see, particularly in healthcare, staff augmentation, creating more productivity, more high value work, elimination of a lot of mundane tasks. symplr, really the entire thesis of symplr is giving healthcare clinicians more time to give care, right? Actually, why they got into healthcare in the first place. We've done some research ourselves lately in the last few months. CIOs and chief medical officers of large systems, we've got about 1,000 data points on this, on average would tell you that if you could remove some of the administrative burden of their staff, they could get up to 8 hours back in a week where they could redeploy that.
Yeah.
Imagine actually seeing more patients. Imagine actually for that nurse
Yeah,
leader.
it's 8 hours that they hate.
It's 20% more time back to actually practice medicine, why they got into healthcare in the first place.
Not fill out forms or deal with administrative issues.
I think AI is a real enabler of that, right? I mean, that's, again, symplr exists for this reason, to give them more time back, but I think what you'll see are meaningful outcome-based investments in technology, right? That they wouldn't have fathomed 3 years ago.
We've lived through these kind of technological changes throughout history. I mean, when the steam shovel replaced the shovel, right? You needed fewer people holding a shovel, and did that cause some people to lose jobs? Yes, but it also created all new jobs and created economic growth. I think what's different this time that causes some people to be more worried is just the speed at which it's happening.
Yeah.
You know, again, this is a technology that I wasn't even familiar with 1 year ago today. And now there's not a conversation I have with a CEO where it doesn't come up. So it's gone from 0 to 100 in just 12 months. That doesn't leave you a lot of time to adjust.
So let's spend some time there. I think it's an incredibly important topic, right? Something comes along this quickly. A lot of folks weren't thinking of investing this materially in it, right? And take the Microsofts and the Amazons and the Metas out of it, right? But for other category CEOs, how do they, what is the current, this will be funny because we're at the beginning of this, what's current thinking on best practice for how to actually evolve an AI strategy?
Well, so it's a question I ask frequently, and I've heard a lot of different answers. You know, the interesting thing about this one is the companies are caught between FOMO, fear of missing out, and what I heard somebody call fogey, fear of getting in. You know, there's fear on both sides, and there is a sense if I let this wave pass me by, somebody's going to figure out how to use it, and I'm going to get killed. But if I move too fast, I could, I don't know, end up in an IP lawsuit or a data privacy lawsuit, or who knows what else. So I do think there's, for big organizations, and I'm sure you see this in healthcare, there's a real tension there. But I think at the end of the day, part of the reason that ChatGPT exploded so fast is because it's so easy to use. So the truth is, you can't stop it. And what I hear the best companies saying is, we encourage our employees to use it, to experiment, to think about how it can improve our business, set some very clear guidelines, some very clear guardrails. Don't use it for this. Don't put any of our data into publicly available large language models. Make sure they understand the guidelines, but encourage them to use it. I mean, somebody said, I wish I had been the first person to say it. I think we've all lost track of who was the first person to say it. But you don't have to worry about your job being replaced by AI. You have to worry about your job being replaced by somebody who knows how to use it. Yeah.
I think I said that.
Did you? I'll bet that was right. That was a
BJ wine. There was a conference. I'm sure you overheard me talking to someone. I can tell you from a symplr point of view. So we've got 2,000 employees, right? And we've been thinking about AI. We make software. We've been thinking about this quite a bit. Our position has been go slow to go fast. So we've been very intentionally looking at very specific both tools and use cases around data that we know we could control. And we'll actually bring those to market deliberately with some design partners here in the first quarter of next year. I attended CEOI a few months ago and heard the CEO of Accenture, who consults on this very topic, and it's spent billions of dollars getting her organization smart on it, say the first thing is, right, I think you said 96% of CEOs want to do something in AI, but only 6% have an owner.
Yeah.
I think is what she quoted.
Yeah, responsible AI.
Yeah, responsible. Thank you, responsible AI. We didn't have an owner. So the first thing I did was went back and appointed our chief product officer the owner of obviously our applications and our UI adoption there, but also internally.
Yeah.
And we started to poke around and do a little bit of forensic work, and we had people experimenting with all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's because anyone can do it.
Because anyone can do it.
You know, I heard some interesting advice last week about how to get your staff comfortable with doing these things. You mentioned earlier about one of the great things about this technology is it takes away the crappy part of your job. It's the drudge work.
You can focus on high value work.
Yeah,
right?
and it will take away some of the administrative stuff. Well, if you can have a demonstration project that proves that, and then turn the people who did that project into evangelists for the technology,
Yeah.
that can help drive the cultural comfort with the technology that can, as you said, move slow to move fast.
Yep, it's an exciting time. I would be remiss if I don't take this opportunity to talk to the godfather, as far as I'm concerned, of stakeholder capitalism. It's been an important topic, and I think some parts of it, ESG in particular, have been unfortunately maligned for a lot of the wrong reasons. Where are we in the state of ESG, both relative to broader stakeholder capitalism and as an initiative by itself?
Look, thank you for saying that about me. I mean, I was not a driver or a proselytizer. I was simply reporting what I was hearing from CEOs, that this was becoming a bigger and bigger topic in the conversations I was having, and I wanted to know why.
Yeah.
And it was after I had that exploration that I decided to write the book, because I think the things driving it are permanent forces that aren't going away. And let me give you sort of one statistic that helps explain why they aren't going away. So this was a study done a couple of years ago, looking at the Fortune 500 and the balance sheet, on their balance sheets, where the value was coming from. And if you did the calculation in the 1970s, what you would find is 80% of the value on the balance sheets of Fortune 500 companies came from physical stuff. It was, if you had the plant, you had the equipment, you had oil in the ground, you had inventory on the shelves. If you had the stuff, you could create value. If you do that same exercise today, more than 85% of the value is from what's called intangibles.
Yep.
Well, what are intangibles? It's intellectual property, it's the emotional connection that your people create with their customers. It's a whole bunch of things that are much more closely tied to human beings.
Yeah.
So I think what we're dealing with in the stakeholder capitalism movement is really the fact that business has become much more human. It's much more human-centric. It's much more driven by the values created by people, and therefore the people are defining the values. So you have to care about your employees. You have to take care of their communities. You have to take care of the planet. Those are all things that your employees want you to do. They're driving you to do. And I don't think that's going to change. Now, you have had this political blowback.
Yep.
Where people are saying, don't be a woke CEO. Why are you talking? Just pay. It's the old Milton Friedman line. The social responsibility of business is to make a profit, period. And so you're getting some of that pushback. What I'm finding at the biggest companies and at the best companies and at the companies that pay attention to talent as their differentiator, they're talking about it less than they were a year ago or 2 years ago. They're not necessarily doing it less.
I think ESG was a victim of bad timing and a little bit of bad marketing.
Definitely bad branding.
Yeah, but it's funny. I grew up in software, right? One of the first big companies I worked for, I started there in late 2007, was into it. And we focused at that time on employees, customers, shareholders, and doing right by the communities in which we serve. Very core values-driven company. As I've become the CEO of a company now, we're nowhere near that size. We're 2,000 team members. But we try, and again, we don't call it ESG. We don't call it well, we do call it DEI. We're actually very serious about that. But it's part of, we try to take care of our employees, and we see it as almost a circle of life, who will then take care of our customers, who will then take care of, frankly, our financial profile. But we do it in that order, right? And we do it very intentionally. We're starting not only to be very successful, I think, sustainably as a result of that focus, which I believe is, number one, it's the right way to do it, but it's also, I think, the most successful way to do it over time. Because if you're taking care of your community, you're going to have the right brand anyways, right? These things become the flywheel of sustainability relative to the kind of company that someone wants to work with. Healthcare systems are not different. except there, so much of it had been patient focused, and now I think it's evolving to also include, rightfully so, and for the first time, the healthcare worker, who's been so neglected for so many years. And so again, it's somewhat tangential, but I think if you really follow that through and think about serving the communities, serving your employees, taking care of your brand, I think healthcare is on the precipice of doing something very similar.
Yeah, I hope that's true. I mean, you look at the hospitality industry and the focus that companies like Marriott and Hyatt and Hilton have put on this, really practicing what you said, that, you know, if your employees are happy, that's the best gift you can give to your guests and your customers. Healthcare could use a dose of that same thinking in many cases. I mean, it's how you interact with your healthcare professional is going to make all the difference in the world to how you feel about it. I don't know. It's simpler what you can do to help encourage that.
Well, without well, how much time do you have? No, I mean it's why symplr exists, right? For too long, the healthcare worker has been burdened with necessary but overly redundant and overly complex administrative tasks, right? You have to have compliance, quality, and safety. You have to get your physicians credentialed. You have to make sure the right nurses are scheduled, but it shouldn't consume your day. And little things, and again, I come from a horizontal technology background, so I'm only 3 years new to healthcare, but I see things like a nursing leader, right? And I'll use a local Colorado facility that I visited. We partnered with a wonderful charity called the Daisy Foundation. They really have pioneered nurse recognition. But I get to meet a lot of these nurse leaders out in the field. And I spent some time. I started asking questions and naturally inquisitive. He said, well, tell me how you spend your day. And this one wonderful woman took me through a 10-hour day, right? And everything she had to do. And I said to her at the end, but when do you spend time with patients? And she laughed and said, BJ, I haven't done that in months.
Wow.
Right? And that's criminal. And that's criminal. I said, well, why'd you get into healthcare? To take care of patients. What's your favorite thing about healthcare? Take care of patients. What are you best at? Taking care of patients. Mentoring younger nurses to take care of patients. What do you get to do? Sit in front of my computer screen, logging into different systems that don't talk to each other all day long, making sure that our manual processes don't send someone to the wrong part of the building or accidentally get someone killed.
Yeah.
And it's all unnecessary. So I do think, I think a little bit of, number one, turning the mirror in healthcare back on the healthcare worker and focusing on those nurses, those physicians, those administrative teams that support the work that's done, and really leveraging technology to improve their data focus on high-value work.
And look, I think that's a great way to approach it and the way people need to be thinking about technology. Not, hey, we can apply this AI and that will get us 30% better productivity and therefore we can get rid of 30% of our workers. But rather, the AI frees up the workers to do what they really should be doing, to really creating more value for the customer.
And what's interesting is I would argue that there are fewer, we talk about the energy grid in our country, and we talk about big infrastructure requirements that we have. We don't talk nearly enough about healthcare, and I think it's concerning because we are on the precipice as these boomers begin to age up into, we are looking at significant demands on this healthcare system, the like of which we've never seen. And we don't have enough nurses. AMA says we're 20% short on nurses for today's demand, let alone what's to come in 5 years. There's a crisis in terms of physician shortages, and no one wants to get into healthcare. You can't recruit new nurses into it because there's so much liability and it's so hard.
And if technology can improve the power of nurses and can give more people access to the expertise of nurses and can help keep people in their homes longer so you don't need the concentration of nurses, that can make all the difference in the world.
I would tend to agree. And I think interestingly too, it's a wonderful self-fulfilling prophecy because if you create more work, more high value work, you'll attract more nurses, which will allow you to see more patients. Here we go back to the cycle of life again, which will actually improve the financial profile of the system so you can continue to make those investments where appropriate. Most healthcare systems are just returning to profitability coming out of the pandemic, and it's still anemic for most. Some are still losing billions of dollars a year, which is terrifying, right? But if you think about the opportunity to do what so many other industries have done, I think about legal, I think about insurance, right? Leverage technology to the benefit of the financial profile, which then drives investment into people. I think it's an obvious I think it's obvious, of course, being a
Yeah.
healthcare technologist, but hopefully systems see it as well.
Yeah, so BJ, we've been talking a lot about technology and how technology is going to improve healthcare. What are the other big issues for your customers, for the people you're talking to?
Yeah, well, I can tell you this whole workforce shortage is one.
Yeah.
Right, and again,
That continues.
It certainly does. Now, one phenomenon we did see is that many nurses during COVID actually left their systems to become traveling nurses, where they could earn 100, 150% more, right, and sometimes not have to work the same overnight shifts and other things. The good news is that's begun to stabilize, and they call it the boomerang effect. So many of those nurses are coming back to the systems, but you're still looking at staff burnout levels that are almost pandemic level. You're still looking at a significant portion of the population that's about to retire. So this workforce problem, I think, is
not
number
going
one.
away.
Right. Number two is, I will tell you that for the first time, and again, 3 years new, but I get to talk to lots of CEOs and CFOs and COOs of healthcare systems. Healthcare systems used to run in a very decentralized way. Right. So if I'm a healthcare system, I may have 27 facilities all over Denver, Colorado. And each has a president or a group leader, and he or she is responsible for patient safety, financial profile, system standards, processes inside that facility. Well, as we've seen more consolidation in the systems, right, which some would argue this administration is not overly a big fan of, right, says it's the detriment of the patient. I think, interestingly, there's an opposite for the converse to be true. But you now see for the first time systems trying to standardize and consolidate. That's a lot of change management. That's a lot of investment in tool and workflows and processes and education for a workforce that's not used to having their cheese moved. And so I do think the phenomenon of healthcare system consolidation, standardization is a really big thing that they know is required.
Yep.
And that they're wrestling with.
Yep.
And I think the third one, it really is this financial profile, right? If they can, and remember, you have for-profits, nonprofits, religious medical centers, academic medical centers, right? You've got ambulatory facilities. There's private equity roll-ups right now in non-acute facilities. There are very different financial profiles, but all of them are still struggling to return to pre-pandemic profitability levels, which weren't exactly healthy.
Yeah.
And within that, make the appropriate investments, which they now need to make, right, in technology, in workflow automation, in upskilling of their workforce. And I think these three things are hitting them all at the same time. And some systems are going, we call it survive or thrive. Yeah. Some are investing, they have a path, they have a strategy, they're working with technology partners or other consultancies to get through it. Some are going fetal and hoping to survive and come out on the other side miraculously, doing things the same way.
Is there a system, is there a marketplace that ensures best practices get shared among others and that you see improvements? I mean, look, we all have to deal with the cost of healthcare and how quickly it's gone up compared to other parts of the economy. It's a tough pressure on anybody who's trying to run a tight household budget.
Yeah, what I will tell you is I've learned that healthcare, unlike other industries, is not as competitive as you may think, right? Despite the commercials you may see in the big markets to come to our hospital if you need a knee replaced, this community shares and is incredibly collaborative. And so just this morning, I was on with the CEO of the largest consortium of CIOs that gather a couple times a year to actually improve and advance healthcare technological adoption, right, at scale. And he and his organization bring together 30, 50, 100 CIOs, and they share best practices. And they share what's working and what technology works and what technology doesn't. And I think you see that in the various disciplines of clinical and non-clinical healthcare operations that benefit the community. I also think you're seeing an introduction of non-healthcare. Look at me. I'm 3 years new to healthcare. I am a babe in the woods by comparison to most of the people I meet with in the category. You're beginning to see a lot more horizontal technologists enter the space, I think to the long-term benefit of healthcare systems, because it's an influx of new ideas and new competency and new technological wherewithal.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. So one other question for you. Our friend Alan Fleischman, who we both know well, has really in a lot of ways taught me about the concept of the CEO statesman or stateswoman. Right, and it really is the evolving role of a CEO. I know, and this is my first CEO job, and I've had a contested election, COVID, an insurrection. We've had riots. We've had the pandemic version 2 with the variants. It's been an interesting 3 years, and I've kind of seen trial by fire. I'd love to get your opinion on the role that you see today and into the future of CEOs driving a technology or any other organization.
Yeah,
You're the CEO of the company yourself.
Yeah. Look, it's changed, and it's changed pretty dramatically. And I think there are a bunch of reasons. I do think there's a generational change. Younger workers today, they just expect more of their employers.
Yeah.
You know, if I think about my father, who was a child of the Depression, he went to work for one reason only. He went to work to make money.
Make
You know, if he wanted to do good in the world, he might go to his church or to the Rotary Club or some other organization, but he went to work to make money.
Yep.
When I talk to my kids, I mean, they want the money. Yes, thank you very much. They'll take that. But they really expect it to give them a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning. You know, I spent a couple of years running the Pew Research Center it was 5 or 6 years ago. And we did some research on the millennial generation. And one of the things that came out of that was kind of striking is a generation that's much slower to get married, much less likely to belong to organized religion, not big joiners, you know, not Moose Club, Elk Club, that kind of thing. And you realize when you looked at the data that in many cases the employer was their only formal connection to society. And so it's understandable that they ask so much of the employer. So I think that's a big change.
Yeah.
I think the environment, the media environment, you know, you can't hide as a CEO, you know this, the way you could have 10 or 15 years ago. Social media, I mean, you're really in a fishbowl. If you do something that somebody wants to call out, they may call it out on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. So I think that's a big change. And then the other thing, BJ, is just, look, people like you who run companies got to where you are because you solve problems. And you like to solve problems, and you're good at solving problems, and so you end up in a business position of responsibility. Unfortunately, that's not the way our political process is working today. You don't have people who are solving problems. All too often, you have people who are trying to take advantage of problems, to trying to split those divides wider. And I think part of that process has put the burden back on businesses. You know, I hear more and more business leaders today say, we have to lead on these issues because nobody else is. Yeah. And, you know, if we allow the environment to burn, if we allow society to break apart over inequality or whatever, we won't continue to exist as a company. And so for our long-term existence, we have to step up and take on some of these bigger problems. And so I think all of those things are forcing CEOs to take a more public leadership role. I tend to think it's a good thing. I'm glad it's happening because, as I said, CEOs are part of an ecosystem where you have to solve problems to get ahead.
Yeah. I think a lot of times too, we do overemphasize the voice of one human, right? You give someone we were joking earlier, I was able to get anywhere on my own for 25 years. Now I become the CEO and I've got 10 staff shuttling me everywhere because apparently I'm incompetent and can't get in an Uber and come downtown in Manhattan on a Thursday afternoon. But I do think it's important also that when you're representing thousands of people, right, that you make sure to do so in a way that fosters inclusivity. And I think that's one of the things as a first-time CEO that I've been most struck by, which is, you know, you have to be your authentic self. You have to be transparent, but you also have to create an environment that really fosters and supports inclusivity, because in a world where you've got basically left-wing news and right-wing news, right? And social media has now truly, by and large, right, particularly in the mainstream, and so many of your team members are now getting proliferated only with the content that reinforces beliefs they may have. You find the workplace all of a sudden being a little bit of a lightning post for social topics, especially in this day and age, elections and geopolitical issues and the like.
Yeah, and BJ, it's also the changing nature of leadership in a world where things are changing so fast. And you have the leadership is pushed out to the fringe, right? You You can't wait for somebody up on top to tell you what to do, because
right.
if you wait that long, you'll lose. So you have to empower the people at the edge. And what that means is the job of the CEO over time has become this. I'm talking big company CEOs now. The job of the CEO over time has become much, much less about telling people what to do.
Sure.
And much more about inspiring them, motivating them, giving them a sense of purpose so that they work together to head towards a common goal. And that requires you to have a moral standing. It requires you to be a voice on issues that are important to your employees. You just can't escape it. So that, for all of those reasons, even when you see some pullback in the light of the political backlash, I don't think this is going to change. I think it's fundamental in the way good companies work today.
I like the way you frame that. We talk a lot, even within our executive team, about individual points of accountability. Right, my president is responsible for our commercial results, our churn reduction, our bookings productivity, our product teams, our customer satisfaction and engagement with the product. My CFO, our profitability. Right, and you say, what? Obviously, I'm responsible for them all, but what am I individually accountable for? And I've thought about it, and my belief is it's regrettable attrition.
Yeah.
Do your good people stay? Do they want to be here? Are they engaged? Are they leaning in? Because in a world of 3% unemployment, they can go anywhere they want. Yeah. I have wonderfully brilliant technologists who could work for any tech software company in the world, and they stay with us because they're connected to the purpose, to the values, and I see that as one of my primary responsibilities. And I'll tell you, it's a hefty obligation, but I think that's what comes with the CEO.
Yeah, and so they look to you for a more expansive leadership than people did to CEOs of 30, 40 years ago.
And I think there's a visibility. Now, granted, we're all remote. I'd actually love to go here next. I'd love to get your
what a hot topic.
Oh, man. And I am not popular with a lot of people because of the stance we've taken. But our company I am, but elsewhere, no. I think there's a level of visibility that again, is what came with the role I took 3 years ago. But I'm in front of the entire company now twice a month. Right, once with a tops down, here's what you need to know to be on the team, and ask some questions. And once for an hour where we show up, member of my executive team and I, and we roll through, and the entire company can come on and ask us any question about any topic, and we answer it. Yeah. Tough questions, right? Tough questions about benefits and layoffs and restructuring and geopolitical events. Yeah. And you can't hide from that anymore. The CEO that show up and reads the talking points off the old punch cards, right, which is what it was when I started 25 years ago, it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, you've got to be authentic. And that, by the way, that happens so fast. I mean, I think even like 10, 15 years ago, the notion of a CEO speaking out on something like transgender access to public bathrooms, it just didn't happen. It never happened. In fact, I did this when George Floyd was killed, and you had this outpouring of corporate CEOs making statements, many of them very impressive, impassioned statements. I went back to, in Ferguson, Missouri, Michael Brown. Yeah. That was maybe 9 years earlier. Yeah. I went back to check my memory because I said, I don't remember any CEO, very similar circumstances, no CEO speaking out on that. Yeah. That just 9, 10 years ago, the standard CEO response to something like that was, well, that's terrible, but doesn't directly affect my bottom line, and it's kind of controversial, and so I'm going to stay out of it. Right. And that's changed.
We would have been counseled to stay away from it.
That's right. Right. And now you have a portion of your valued workers who are expecting you to take a stand.
And interestingly, the stands on the big topics matter, and you have to get those right. I mean, it's a moral obligation. But I do think what it also does is it creates an expectation more than anything else. You can be wrong, but you can't be inauthentic. And, again, first time, 2,000 employees. Of anything that we get back in the data, our employees appreciate authenticity above all else. Just don't corporate speak us. Don't treat us like idiots. We're intelligent adults, right? And I always say individuals or smart, groups can be a little not so much, but treat them like the intelligent adult individuals that they are and be authentic. Explain the why. Even if they don't like a decision, explain the why, and they'll come along with you.
I think that's good advice. I think the other thing, and this is really the core to stakeholder capitalism, is you got to understand up front who your stakeholders are, who the people that your company really depends on, and who if you lose them, you could be in real trouble. And pay attention to them early on. Don't wait for the crisis. We all watched a few years ago the interesting episode in Florida with Disney, where Florida passes a law that's referred to sometimes as the Don't Say Gay law that restricted conversations about sexuality among younger school children, and Disney was there in Florida, a major constituent of the state, and Bob Chapek, who was then the CEO, he's not anymore, probably in part because of this. Bob Chapek decided at first not to say anything, to do what every CEO would have done 10 years earlier, saying, hey, not my thing, doesn't directly affect my bottom line, I'm not going to talk about it. And then he came under pressure from his own employees and finally came out and criticized the law. And the one thing anybody in PR will tell you is, you can do this, you can do that, but don't do both. That's the worst. That gets to your point about authenticity. That's right. So I always wondered which answer he thought was the right one. Does he wish he had not said anything, or does he wish he had said something earlier? And so I saw him maybe a month or two after that, and I had the chance to ask him that. And he said, I had to speak out. And I said, really, why? And he said, because, and this gets back to where value is created in the corporation. What is Disney? It's not a bunch of pipes and buildings. Disney is the creative material that the Disney, Imagineers, the people who make the magic of the creative community. And it was the creative community that was so offended by what happened in Florida. And he said he met with them after the whole thing blew up and heard so many impassioned stories from people who talked about stories of their own childhood, where they were bullied as kids or mistreated as kids. And he came out of that discussion feeling he had no choice but to oppose it. Well, that's fine, but why hadn't those conversations happened before the crisis? Why hadn't they happened before then? So I think that's really, look, these jobs are much tougher than they've been before because you do have so many stakeholders that you have to pay attention to, but paying attention to those stakeholders and understanding what the values are that really matter to your corporation and who the people are who really contribute to the value in your corporation, and knowing what their needs and demands and emotions are before the crisis hits is critical.
And perhaps understanding where they may want to work. So remote work. Right. That was my attempt at a transition.
It was a little weak, but that's okay. I just want people to understand that you and I are here in the same place. I can touch you.
Yes.
You're right here.
I like that. That felt good. So the concept of what is the future of the workplace, what is the future of remote work is top of mind for so many. symplr, from our own point of view, we did 7 acquisitions in 2 years. We went remote not to save money. We went remote because we needed something that would unify our culture. And when we looked at the data, most people weren't going to the offices before anyways. And when we surveyed our people, they said, well, we'd love to be able to have something to go in, but if given a choice, we'd much rather work remote. And
so you're completely remote.
We are completely remote.
So good for you. And there's no reason why this should be a one-size-fits-all
I don't think it is.
Question. But I can tell you that there are a lot of people who feel very strongly that in-person human interaction on a regular basis is critical to a strong corporate culture. Now you may be able to do it without it, and more power to you, and maybe a lot of people should learn from that. But I think there is a strong drive to get people to spend more time back in the office. And there's some pretty significant downsides too. I mean, we know mental health issues
Indeed.
were exacerbated by loneliness during the pandemic.
Yeah.
There's tons of evidence that shows that's true.
Yeah. We're watching it very closely. The reason we actually even endeavored with this approach was because the downside of going back is reasonably immaterial, right? If it doesn't work, we build a headquarters.
Yeah.
And we figure it out from there. We build a series of offices. But interestingly, what we've found, and what I've talked to other CEOs who have had similar or close to our experiences, to your point, number one size does not fit all, right? I have software developers. Many of that persona prefers a little bit of isolation, right? Now, my sales and professional services people would love to get together, right, as often as they possibly could. And we create that, by the way, those experiences for community and for in-person events. But we have people who write code in the sky that we can deliver remotely to our customers. Our industry, it works. I will tell you that the difference that I think, got right is that we're not trying to run the company the way we did when we were in person. We run it as a remote company.
Yeah.
We are very deliberate about our rules with cameras and with interactions and with one-on-ones and how we do it. I think that made a difference.
It totally makes sense that there have to be ways of creating a strong culture other than throwing everybody into a building and seeing what happens.
Completely.
But having said that, most people are struggling with it. They don't seem to know how to do it. And there is, I think all of us who are in positions of responsibility and management have just seen the evidence that if people are interacting with each other on a regular basis, trust increases, ease of cooperation across groups increases, and it leads to good results. And it doesn't mean you have to be in 5 days a week.
Yeah.
But it does mean that people need to get to know each other.
I think the next couple of years will be interesting. And I, were I a gambling man, which I'm not, I think it lands somewhere in the middle. I do think one of the benefits though of some of this is that it's less about where you punch a clock for 8 hours, and it's more about the outcomes you produce.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it should be.
There's a brilliant woman from Boston Consulting Group, Debbie Lovich, who's
I know Debbie well.
Absolutely brilliant. And
Yeah.
she had I heard her speak at one of our sponsor events, and she said something to the effect of, your people have the internet. Do you think they were any more productive in an office when they had a computer screen and access to the internet and online shopping? Like, really?
Yeah.
And so it's really more about judging productivity, judging outcomes, worrying less about time, worrying less about physical presence, and really, what do we want our people to accomplish, and are they accomplishing?
I think that's right. And the other thing, BJ, you said it's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out. The truth is, if you look at the card swipe data in the major U.S. cities, it's stabilized.
It has.
It has been flat at about 50% for the last 2 years. So I don't really see any reason, even though there are plenty of people beating their chests and saying get back to the office, I don't see any reason to think you're going to see dramatic change from where we are right now.
I don't think so either, because I can tell you every time another software company tries it, I get a whole new slew of candidates that want to come try this.
People coming in.
So it's really interesting.
Yeah, I have a daughter who's in the middle of this right now. She's applying for jobs. She would like a 100% virtual job.
Sure.
I'm not sure she's going to get it, but I'll bet she doesn't end up in a 5 day a week in the office job. In fact, I don't think there are that many of those left.
Yeah, and there are generational pieces of this too that I think the next few years in this is going to be super interesting. All right, you've been so generous with your time. We only have a few minutes left. I will give you my CEO of Fortune softball question. It's a crazy year ahead. I'm not going to ask you to pick what the hell's going to happen with the election, because I don't think I want to know at this point. But what does the next year hold for business? What is it? Is it a soft landing? Do you see growth? Do you see a looming recession?
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'll start with that. And
The markets will not move today. Yeah.
Whatever I say, you'd probably do well to bet the opposite. But look, I mean, we're having a soft landing right now. It's remarkable. I wouldn't have predicted that we would end this year with a 5% growth rate and inflation coming down to 3% and interest rates now starting to come off and the stock market soaring. So this is about as good as it gets. You talk about a Goldilocks scenario, this is it. I think that the incredible monetary experiment that we went through for over a decade of giving away free money to whoever wanted it is bound to have ramifications, unintended consequences. And we probably haven't seen them all yet. When you think about what's happened to interest rates over the course of the last year and a half, right? We were talking about this earlier. More than a doubling of interest rates after a decade of free money. There've got to be people feeling that pain. And sometimes the effect is delayed, because if you think about it, okay, let's take the obvious example. You're an office building.
Yep.
you're at 50% occupancy, so all your tenants are trying to get out because they're only using half as much space as they did before, and you have debt, and the debt is about to roll over, and it's going to roll over at more than double what it was at before. That's got to be causing some pain, and I don't think we've seen the end of that. And so that puts a little bit of a cloud over the economy for the next year. So that's the thing I'd keep an eye on.
Yeah, it's. I can tell you, healthcare is conservatively optimistic, right? Conservatively optimistic. I do think there's some good momentum, and systems are seeing the outcomes of investments that they have made over the last few years. And I think in that regard, it'll continue. I also think that patient demand is back to pre-COVID levels.
That's good.
And so as long as there are either the workforce or more realistically a more productive workforce to meet that demand, I think some of the prospects for healthcare are promising.
And BJ, if you want to end on a high note,
always do, Alan.
Good. Then this technology wave, more than previous technology waves, seems to be producing almost immediate gains in productivity.
It does.
And the more that happens, the more it becomes a macro phenomena. Productivity cures everything. You can pay people more. Inflation is less of a problem. So that's the thing to hope for, that we are on the verge of a productivity revolution that can give us stronger growth, higher increases in standards of living, and prevent us from sinking into a recession anytime soon.
I think even Milton Friedman would agree with that. Alan Murray, CEO of Fortune Media, I cannot, on behalf of all of our folks who tuned in today and the folks who watch this after the fact, it has been an honor. You are so gracious and kind with your time, and I thank you for spending this hour with us. I could have done it for 3 more hours.
Well, I'm available.
No, you got a holiday party you got to get back to.
Well, that's true.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.